There are two questions that I am getting asked by just about everybody that I know. And those questions are: is it better to buy when interest rates are high or when interest rates are low? And that might seem like a really easy question to answer, but I think that the answer might actually surprise you given today's circumstances. The second question I'm getting asked is: what's going to happen in this market? Now, I recently watched the presentation by Larry Summers at the All In Summit, and I loved what he said. He said there are two kinds of economists: there's those who don't know, and then there are those who don't know that they don't know. And so, if anyone tells you that they know what's going to happen in the real estate market, my advice is you should run. But this is why I do love numbers so much, because numbers give us some insight into what is happening in the market. And to answer these two questions, there are a couple of concepts that we can sort of break down that give us some insight and tell us a little bit about what's happening and what may happen in the market, and will help us answer whether or not it is better to buy when the interest rates are high or low. First, interest rates do not determine home prices. Supply and demand and the equilibrium between supply and demand is what determines home values. So yes, interest rates do impact demand, as we're going to see here in just a minute, and they do impact supply also, but they do not determine the home prices. So I can prove this to you. Let's go ahead and look at this little spreadsheet that I've created. All right, this simple spreadsheet is showing a particular scenario. Let's assume a purchase price of $450,000, down payment of 20%, loan amount $360,000. And then let's just say that today's rate is 7.75%. Obviously, they're all over the place and every market is different, but this is sort of what we're seeing in our market. So the math of that says that with those numbers, the payment, the principal and interest payment, will be $2,579. Okay, so now what we're going to do over here in these columns is we're going to actually hold that payment constant at $2,579, but we're going to let the rate change. So each column has a different rate. And then we're going to reverse engineer from the fixed payment of $2,579, given that rate, what would the loan amount be, the down payment, and the purchase price. So what we're seeing here very clearly and very quickly is that the purchasing power of the buyers is impacted by the interest rates. So you can see over here in column M, when the rates used to be 3%, that that payment would be equivalent to a price of $765,000, and we are in this scenario comparing back to $450,000 purchase price. Now, that is a difference of 41%. So if interest rates were the sole determinant of home prices, then what we would have seen is we would have seen a decrease of 41% in home values. Okay, so let's see, what did we actually see? This chart right here shows the median home price for all property types in the Las Vegas market. And I'm using this one because I'm most familiar with it and because it's been fairly similar on a national basis also. In fact, you'll see here that the decrease we saw in prices because of decreased demand due to higher interest rates was an 11% decrease. That's the same as what we saw on the national average. And now we're also seeing in Las Vegas, the last little while, we have seen an uptick of about 4%. Now, this initial decrease in home prices was probably caused by a decrease in demand because of the increasing interest rates. That was made up of two kinds of people. There were two groups in this decreased demand. The first group is those who simply did not qualify anymore at the higher interest rates. Their debt to income ratios made it so that they could not purchase a home with that high of a payment, and so they are just out of the market because of that. But there's a second group in there, and that group is those who do qualify but have just decided not to participate. They've just decided that the cost of the money is high enough for them that they decide not to buy. Now, I believe that this increase, this little tick up in prices that we've seen in the Las Vegas market is due to the fact that this second group has now started to enter back into the market. Now, what this is showing us is that There are two forces at play here. Supply is really low. Why is supply low? Well, a lot of people have a 2-3% interest rate. They don't want to let go of those interest rates. So financially speaking, there's a lot of people who are not motivated to sell their house and trade into a higher interest rate. And the second thing that's going on here is that demand remains very strong. Now, what's going to happen? This is the question you should run if anyone tells you they know what's going to happen. There are a lot of people who are saying that this housing market is similar to what we had in 2008, where we saw that huge price crash. We saw a crash in the housing market. And I think that this scenario is actually quite different than that. It's clear that in 2008, people were way overextended. And in this case, people are deciding not to sell because of low interest rates. So even if we have a recession, which I personally think is pretty likely to happen, the people who are in these houses with these lower interest rates are not likely to see a recession bad enough that it causes them to be squeezed out of their situation, and then we are unlikely to see a massive supply of housing come onto the market. So what that means is that we know demand is high. We can see in the numbers that demand is high. And even in increasing interest rates, demand is high. And supply is low and is likely to remain low. So here's the question. What is likely to happen when the interest rates do go low? Well, it's very likely that there's going to be incredible upward pressure on housing prices. Okay, so now the question, is it better to buy when interest rates are high or low? Let me remind you what it was like for buyers when interest rates were low. It was not a friendly environment. And so you might say, well, today's not a friendly environment because the interest rates are so high. But let's look at another spreadsheet here that uses this same scenario, $450,000, 20% down. You'll recognize these numbers. It's the 2579. What if you did enter the market at this point and you had that payment? Well, eventually rates are going to go back down. And I personally think in the next 1 or 2 years, we're going to see rates around 5% just based on the historical averages. That's what I think it's going to look like. And when that happens, as you can see here in this spreadsheet, then your payment would go to $1,933. So would go down by, roughly $600. And so what that means is that you have an opportunity now to enter the market, and yeah, you're gonna pay a higher interest rate for a little while, but you're gonna be able to buy in a time when it is actually favorable to sellers to buy. And ask yourself, when the interest rates go down, what is that going to look like for buyers? I think it's going to look a lot like it did before, and so it's definitely not necessarily true that later will be a better time to buy. Now, everybody's circumstances are different, and so all things need to be taken into consideration before making that decision. But keep in mind these concepts and these numbers that we've talked about today, because it's not always just as straightforward as, oh, interest rates are high, so I definitely should not buy now.